The Real Deal presents
1, 2, 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock, rock. 9, 10, 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock, rock. We're going to rock, 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 rock.
this week's Today in Rock History with your host, Wallace Edwards.
In the early summer of 1977, it was no secret that Elvis Presley had become increasingly despondent and depressed since his divorce from Priscilla, his wife of 10 years, after discovery of her tempestuous affairs with no less than 22 clandestine lovers. More than half of that number made up of members of the Greater Memphis Police Department. And it's a known fact that in the later days of his life, Elvis Presley, by all accounts, had little empathy or even common respect for those he deemed, quote, them dang old good-for-nothing police. And so, rather than engage off-duty law enforcement personnel for security during live performances for some of the largest audiences in history, Elvis took to surrounding himself with an ever-increasing number of celebrities and hangers-on, including Saturday Night Live cast member John Belushi, Eagles guitarist Joe Walsh, half a dozen of the famous Dallas Cowboy cheerleaders, actor Jimmy Walker from TV's Good Times, and two of the Village People, the Indian chief and the construction worker, and most certainly not the cop. But it was Elvis's growing friendship with counterculture gonzo journalist Hunter H. Thompson that would most influence the middle-aged Presley during his days of despair that summer. On May 30th of that year, the night's performance in Baltimore was cut short by more than an hour. And not because Elvis was too exhausted to complete the show. In fact, he'd scheduled a meeting with Thompson in outer Frederick County in the town of Burkittsville for the purposes of scoring a large quantity of Acapulco Gold cannabis, window pane acid, and fresh mescaline. Elvis and his entourage of hippies and dope fiends made the 60-mile trip in just under 25 minutes. The drug deal itself actually went quite well. Elvis had bought a trunk full of powerful hallucinogens and some of the best grass in the Western Hemisphere by 10 p.m. It was Presley's last-minute decision to stop at the Burkittsville Quick Sack for a Pepsi and a moon pie that really started the trouble. As the entourage was leaving the little mom-and-pop store on the outskirts of town, Jimmy Walker, in a moment of decidedly poor judgment, attempted to shoplift an entire box of old-fashioned Swisher cigars on his way out, in full view of 3 officers of the Maryland State Police. When the shop owner contested, Walker, an accomplished petty thief, knew the best thing to do was to continue out the doors if no offense had been committed. And he did. And that left the great Elvis Presley alone in the company of one enraged small-town entrepreneur and 3 suddenly attentive policemen. And his natural reaction was to smile that smirking Elvis smile at the state policeman as he flipped him the bird. In retrospect, the officers who thought Presley was one of the growing number of Elvis impersonators and who also never caught a single episode of Good Times on TV had no idea they were in the presence of some of the higher echelon of celebrity at the time. Needless to say, Elvis never made it to the door. In a space of nearly 15 whole minutes, those members of the Maryland State Police beat the middle-aged king of rock and roll severely and without mercy. He suffered 2 broken ribs, a bruised kidney, probably a concussion, and he inadvertently bit the tip of his tongue nearly completely off. Luckily, and it probably saved his life, Elvis Presley stood a full 6 feet tall on a standard big-boned hillbilly frame. He also had studied years of karate and Muay Kung Fu, and had actually gotten in a few licks of his own by the time John Belushi came inside to investigate. The subsequent cover-up was one of the first of its kind. Both the Maryland's Attorney General and RCA Records, Elvis's record label, engaged in a complete don't ask, don't tell, clean slate policy of suppression of the facts. No arrests or convictions were subsequently pursued, as it turned out Elvis had lived to face what he considered his greatest enemy and a symbol of all that had gone wrong in his life and career. A whole barrack's worth of small-town policemen. He also had, in the trunk of his limo, enough illegal substances to last for the rest of his life, which turned out to be a short 46 days later. But at least in that 2.5-month span, in the words of Hunter Thompson, he lived like a king and he died like a king, without fear or loathing. and with a head full of strong and marvelous hallucinogens. And with that, I'm Wallace Edwards.